The first months of fatherhood tested every assumption Tom had made about raising a child. Hope was a good baby overall, but she had her challenging moments that left him questioning his abilities as a parent. The 2 a.m. feedings were particularly difficult, when exhaustion made even simple tasks feel overwhelming. During those long nights, Tom would often find himself talking to Hope about ranch life, describing the horses and cattle she would someday meet, sharing stories about his own childhood on the same land. Dr. Winters had recommended regular checkups to monitor Hope's development, given her traumatic start in life. Each visit to the pediatrician brought both relief and new concerns. Hope was gaining weight appropriately and meeting most developmental milestones, but she seemed more sensitive to changes in routine than typical babies. Loud noises startled her more easily, and she had trouble settling down in unfamiliar environments. It's not unusual for children who experienced early trauma to show heightened sensitivity, Dr. Winters explained during one visit. The important thing is providing consistency and security. She needs to know that you'll always be there for her. Tom took those words to heart, structuring his days around Hope's needs. The ranch work continued, but he modified his schedule to accommodate feeding times and naps. He invested in a baby monitor with a range that covered most of the property, allowing him to hear Hope even when he was working in the barn or the outer pastures. Claire became an invaluable source of support and advice. She visited several times a week, helping with laundry, bringing home-cooked meals, and giving Tom brief respites when he needed to handle ranch business that required his full attention. Her own children, ranging in age from 8 to 16, were fascinated by their new cousin and eager to help with her care. "You're doing better than you think," Claire assured Tom one afternoon as they watched Hope sleep in her crib. "She's thriving, and anyone can see how much she adores you. Trust your instincts." But Tom's confidence was shaken when Hope developed colic at 3 months old. The crying spell seemed to come from nowhere and could last for hours, leaving both father and daughter exhausted and frustrated. Tom tried everything the parenting books suggested: different feeding positions, burping techniques, swaddling, gentle massage, but nothing seemed to provide consistent relief. During one particularly difficult evening, Tom found himself walking the floors of the ranch house at midnight, Hope screaming inconsolably in his arms. He felt helpless and overwhelmed, wondering if the Morrisons would have been better equipped to handle these challenges. The doubt was crushing, made worse by his isolation and inexperience. In desperation, Tom called Claire, knowing she would understand his panic. She arrived within 20 minutes, still in her robe and slippers, and took Hope from his trembling arms. "Sometimes babies just need to cry," she said calmly, holding Hope against her shoulder and swaying gently. "It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. Colic is miserable for everyone involved, but it will pass." Claire stayed that night, taking the late feeding so Tom could sleep. When he woke the next morning, he found her rocking Hope on the front porch, both of them peaceful in the early morning sunshine. "She's fine," Claire said softly. "And so are you. Being a parent means having moments when you feel completely lost. That doesn't make you a bad father. It makes you human." The colic phase lasted 6 weeks, testing Tom's endurance and commitment in ways he hadn't anticipated. But gradually, Hope's digestive system matured, and the crying spells became less frequent and less intense. The relief Tom felt when she began sleeping through the night was profound, and he realized how much stronger their bond had become through surviving those difficult weeks together. As Hope approached her first birthday, her personality began to emerge more clearly. She was curious about everything, reaching for objects with determination and studying faces with intense concentration. She showed particular fascination with the ranch animals, laughing delightedly when Tom carried her to the barn to see the horses. The horses, surprisingly, seemed drawn to Hope as well. Old Belle, a gentle mare who had been on the ranch for 15 years, would walk to the fence whenever she saw Tom approaching with the baby. Hope would squeal with excitement and reach her tiny hands toward Belle's soft nose, completely unafraid of the large animal. "She's going to be a natural with animals," Tom told Claire, watching Hope's fearless interaction with the ranch dogs. "Maybe she inherited more from this place than we thought." Tom had given considerable thought to Hope's origin story and how much to tell her as she grew older. He decided early on that he would always be honest about her adoption, but he would frame it in terms of love and choice rather than abandonment. He began creating a photo album documenting her life from the day he brought her home, including pictures of the hospital staff who had cared for her and the ranch that had become their home. Hope's first birthday party was a community celebration. The hospital staff who had cared for her attended, along with neighbors, friends, and Jennifer Hayes, who continued to check on them periodically as part of her professional responsibilities. Even Judge Sullivan made an appearance, bringing a children's book about Montana wildlife as a gift. "She's grown into such a beautiful, happy child," Patricia Coleman said, watching Hope clap her hands as everyone sang happy birthday. "You've done an amazing job, Tom. She's obviously thriving." Tom looked around at the gathering of people who had played roles in bringing Hope into his life and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. A year ago, he had been a solitary rancher with no thoughts of fatherhood. Now he couldn't imagine life without his daughter's laughter filling the house. As Hope grew from toddler to preschooler, her love for ranch life became evident. She followed Tom everywhere, chattering constantly in her mixture of real words and made-up language. By age 3, she could identify different breeds of horses and cattle, knew the names of all the ranch dogs, and showed remarkable fearlessness around animals that intimidated many adults. Tom enrolled Hope in a preschool program in town, wanting her to have interaction with other children and formal learning opportunities. The transition was difficult at first. Hope was used to the freedom and space of ranch life, and the structured environment of school felt confining. She also struggled with separation anxiety, crying when Tom dropped her off and counting the minutes until pickup time. Mrs. Anderson, Hope's preschool teacher, worked patiently with both father and daughter to ease the adjustment. She suggested that Tom bring photos of the ranch animals for Hope to share with her classmates, turning her unique background into something to be proud of rather than different. "Hope has such interesting stories to tell," Mrs. Anderson reported during parent conferences. "She's taught the other children about horses and cattle, and she has a natural leadership quality that emerges during outdoor play. She's just needed time to adjust to being around so many people." The social challenges continued into elementary school, but Hope gradually learned to navigate both worlds, the quiet, natural environment of the ranch and the bustling, social atmosphere of school. She made friends slowly but deeply, preferring a few close relationships to large groups of acquaintances. Tom supported her friendships by hosting birthday parties and sleepovers at the ranch, giving Hope's classmates opportunities to experience her world. Many of the children had never been on a working ranch, and Hope delighted in teaching them about animal care and showing them how to brush horses and collect eggs from the chickens. "She's really found her confidence," Tom told Claire one afternoon. Watching Hope lead a group of friends, the winter wind howled across the empty parking lot of St. Mary's Hospital in small-town Montana, carrying with it the bitter cold that made even the bravest souls hurry indoors. It was just past midnight on February 14, 1987, when Nurse Patricia Coleman stepped outside for what should have been a quick smoke break during her night shift. The temperature had dropped to -15 degrees, and fresh snow was beginning to fall. Patricia pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders as she walked toward the employee entrance. That's when she heard it, a sound so faint she almost missed it over the whistling wind. A soft crying, barely audible but unmistakably human. She stopped walking and listened carefully, her heart beginning to race. Following the sound, Patricia discovered a small wicker basket tucked behind a maintenance shed, partially hidden by shadows. Inside, wrapped in what appeared to be old towels and a thin blanket, was a newborn baby. The infant couldn't have been more than a few days old, her tiny face red from the cold, her cries weak but persistent. Attached to the blanket was a crumpled piece of paper with words scrawled in shaky handwriting. "No one's child. Please take care of her." "I can't." Patricia scooped up the basket without hesitation and rushed inside, calling for Dr. Sarah Winters, the pediatrician on duty. Within minutes, the hospital's emergency room sprang into action. The baby was hypothermic, dehydrated, and dangerously underweight. Her body temperature was so low that the medical team worked frantically to warm her slowly and safely. Dr. Winters examined the infant with gentle hands, noting that despite her ordeal, the baby showed no signs of serious injury or illness beyond the effects of exposure. "She's a fighter," the doctor whispered to Patricia as they watched the tiny chest rise and fall in the incubator. "Most babies wouldn't have survived what she's been through." The police were called, as required by law, and Detective Maria Santos arrived within the hour. She photographed the basket, the note, and the location where the baby was found. The handwriting analysis would take weeks, and there were no security cameras in that area of the hospital. The investigation would be thorough, but Detective Santos had worked enough abandonment cases to know that finding the birth mother would be nearly impossible if she didn't want to be found. News of the abandoned baby spread quickly through the small community of Copper Ridge, Montana. By morning, local television stations were reporting the story, and the hospital was flooded with calls from concerned citizens wanting to help. Some offered to adopt the baby, others wanted to donate clothes and supplies. The story touched something deep in people's hearts, perhaps because it was Valentine's Day, or maybe because the idea of a helpless infant left in the cold stirred their protective instincts. Social worker Jennifer Hayes was assigned to the case. She had been working with abandoned and neglected children for over 15 years, but something about this particular case affected her more than usual. The baby, whom the hospital staff had begun calling Hope until a permanent name could be decided, seemed to have an unusual strength for such a tiny being. While Hope grew stronger in the hospital's care, the search for her parents continued. Detective Santos interviewed hospital staff, checked recent birth records, and followed up on missing person reports. She spoke with local shelters and crisis centers, hoping someone might remember a pregnant woman in distress. Every lead led to a dead end. 20 miles outside of Copper Ridge, rancher Thomas McAllister was dealing with his own struggles. At 42, Tom had never married and had spent his entire adult life working the ranch his father had left him. The 800-acre spread was successful enough, with cattle and horses providing a modest living, but Tom often felt the loneliness that came with rural life. Tom's nearest neighbor was his sister Claire, who lived with her husband and 3 children on a smaller ranch 5 miles down the road. Claire had been urging Tom to consider adoption for years, knowing how much he loved children and how good he was with her own kids. Tom always brushed off her suggestions, claiming he was too set in his ways and too busy with ranch work. That morning, Tom was in town picking up feed supplies when he stopped by Murphy's Diner for coffee. The place was buzzing with conversation about the abandoned baby. Tom listened quietly as the other customers discussed the story, some expressing anger at whoever would leave a child in such conditions, others showing sympathy for what must have been a desperate situation. Old Pete Murphy, who owned the diner, shook his head sadly as he refilled Tom's coffee cup. "Breaks your heart, doesn't it? That little one fighting for her life, while whoever left her is out there somewhere. Makes you wonder what kind of desperation would drive a person to such a thing." Tom found himself thinking about the conversation long after he left the diner. Something about the story wouldn't let go of him. That evening, as he sat alone in his farmhouse kitchen, he made an unusual decision. He would visit the hospital and see if there was anything he could do to help. The next morning, Tom drove to St. Mary's Hospital carrying a bag of baby clothes that Claire had insisted he take from her children's outgrown items. He felt awkward and out of place in the sterile hospital environment, his work boots echoing loudly on the polished floors. Nurse Patricia was working the day shift when Tom approached the nurse's station. She recognized him immediately. The McAllister family had been part of the community for 3 generations, and Tom was known as a decent, hard-working man who kept to himself but would help a neighbor in need without hesitation. "I heard about the baby," Tom said, his voice gruff with emotion he couldn't quite hide. "Brought some things that might help." He held up the bag of clothes, feeling foolish but compelled to do something. Patricia smiled warmly. "That's very kind of you, Mr. McAllister. Would you like to see her? She's doing much better now." Tom hesitated. He hadn't planned on actually seeing the baby. He just intended to drop off the clothes and leave. But something made him nod, and he followed Patricia down the hallway to the nursery. Through the glass window, Tom saw Hope for the first time. She was sleeping peacefully in her crib, no longer needing the incubator. Her tiny fists were curled up near her face, and Dark hair peeked out from under a pink knit cap. She was smaller than any baby Tom had ever seen, but there was something about her that struck him immediately. "She's beautiful," he whispered, surprised by the emotion in his own voice. "She is," Patricia agreed. "And she's strong. The doctor says she should be ready to leave the hospital soon, once social services finds a placement for her." Tom couldn't explain what happened next. Something deep inside him, some instinct he didn't know he possessed, made him ask, "What kind of placement are they looking for?" Patricia studied his face carefully. She had seen enough people over the years to recognize genuine interest when she saw it. Well, ideally a family that can provide love, stability, and a good home. Someone patient, because babies who've been through trauma sometimes need extra care. Someone committed to giving her the life she deserves. Tom nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the sleeping infant. How would a person go about? I mean, what would be the process if someone wanted to? "Are you asking about adoption, Mr. McAllister?" The word hung in the air between them. Tom had never seriously considered having children of his own, let alone adopting. But, looking at this tiny, abandoned child, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe it was the protective instinct that came from years of caring for vulnerable animals on his ranch. Maybe it was the loneliness he'd been carrying for so long. Or maybe it was simply the recognition that this child needed someone, and he needed her just as much. "I might be," he said finally. Patricia smiled and placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Why don't I put you in touch with Jennifer Hayes, the social worker handling Hope's case? She can explain the process and answer any questions you might have." That afternoon, Tom met with Jennifer in her office at the Department of Family Services. Jennifer was impressed by Tom's sincerity and his thoughtful questions about the responsibilities of raising an adopted child. She explained the home study process, the background checks, the training classes he would need to complete, and the legal procedures involved. "I have to ask, Mr. McAllister," Jennifer said, leaning forward in her chair. "This is a big decision, especially for a single man with no experience raising children. What makes you think you're ready for this commitment?" Tom was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "I've been thinking about that since yesterday. I've spent my whole life taking care of things, animals, land, machinery, making sure they have what they need to thrive. I know raising a child is different, more complicated. But when I saw that little girl, I felt something I've never felt before. Like maybe we were meant to find each other." Jennifer had heard many reasons from prospective adoptive parents over the years, but there was something about Tom's simple honesty that convinced her he was serious. She agreed to begin the preliminary paperwork, warning him that the process would take several months and that there were no guarantees. Over the next few weeks, Tom threw himself into the adoption process with the same determination he brought to everything else in his life. He attended parenting classes in the evenings after finishing his ranch work. He read books about child development and infant care. He visited Hope at the hospital almost every day, sometimes just sitting quietly beside her crib, talking to her in low, gentle tones about life on the ranch. The hospital staff began to look forward to Tom's visits. He had a calming presence, and Hope seemed to respond to his voice. Sometimes, when she was fussy, Patricia would call Tom and ask if he could come in. Without fail, Hope would settle down when he spoke to her. Dr. Winters was initially skeptical about a single, inexperienced man adopting an infant who might have special needs related to her traumatic start in life. But, as she observed Tom's interactions with Hope, her doubts began to fade. She saw how carefully he held her during feeding time, how naturally he seemed to understand her needs, and how protective he was of her well-being. The home study process required multiple visits from social workers to Tom's ranch. He prepared meticulously, baby-proofing rooms, and setting up a nursery in what had been his father's study. The room had large windows that looked out over the pastures where horses grazed peacefully. Tom painted the walls a soft yellow and assembled a crib with the help of his brother-in-law. Claire was thrilled when Tom told her about his decision to adopt Hope. She had always known her brother would make a wonderful father, despite his protests that he wasn't cut out for family life. She helped him shop for baby supplies, teaching him about car seats, strollers, and the countless items that babies seem to require. "Are you scared?" Claire asked one evening as they folded tiny clothes and arranged them in the nursery dresser. Tom considered the question seriously. "Terrified," he admitted. But it's a good kind of scared, if that makes sense. Like the way you feel before you break a wild horse. Nervous, but excited about the possibilities. The legal proceedings moved forward slowly but steadily. Detective Santos closed her investigation after exhausting all leads to find Hope's birth parents. The state terminated parental rights, clearing the way for adoption. Tom's background check came back clean, and his references painted a picture of a responsible, caring man who was respected in his community. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, an unexpected complication arose. A couple from Billings contacted social services, claiming they had been on a waiting list for infant adoption for over 2 years. They argued that they should have priority over a single man with no experience raising children. They had more resources, a 2-parent household, and a proven track record with their biological children. Jennifer found herself in a difficult position. The couple, David and Susan Morrison, were well-qualified adoptive parents with an approved home study and strong financial stability. On paper, they appeared to offer everything a child could need. But Jennifer couldn't ignore the bond she had witnessed between Tom and Hope, or the progress the baby had made during his frequent visits. The decision would ultimately rest with the family court judge, but Jennifer knew that Hope's best interests had to be the primary consideration. She arranged for both Tom and the Morrisons to spend supervised time with Hope, documenting their interactions and the baby's responses. The Morrisons were loving and capable, but Hope seemed to sense the difference. She cried more during their visits and had trouble settling down. With Tom, she was calm and content, often falling asleep in his arms. The contrast was subtle but noticeable to the trained eyes of the hospital staff. Tom felt his world crumbling when he learned about the competing adoption petition. He had allowed himself to believe that Hope would be his daughter, and the thought of losing her was almost unbearable. He consulted with a lawyer, who warned him that single-parent adoptions were often viewed less favorably than 2-parent households, especially when the alternative was a married couple with proven parenting experience. "Fight for her," Claire urged her brother. "You're meant to be her father. Anyone can see that." But Tom wasn't sure if his love for Hope would be enough to overcome the practical advantages the Morrisons could offer. As the court date approached, he prepared himself for the possibility that he might lose the child who had already become the center of his world. The night before the hearing, Tom sat in the nursery he had prepared, surrounded by all the hopes and dreams he had built around becoming Hope's father. He thought about the note that had been left with her, no one's child. Soon, he would learn whether she would become his child or whether another family would give her the future she deserved. Outside, the Montana winter continued its grip on the land. But inside the warm ranch house, Tom held on to the hope that love would be enough.